And with that, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our Bolinas Beach Closure Virtual Town Hall. My name is Lainey Hendricks. I'm the Communications Director for the County of Marin. And this evening, we will be hosting kind of a Q&A session, if you will. At this point in this whole process, I'm willing to bet there's probably more questions than answers as we continue to dive into the data behind what's happening and try to figure out not only the source of the matter, but more importantly, solutions. But we at least wanted to meet with you and provide you all the information that we do have and try our very best to answer the questions that might be top of mind for you as it relates to Bolinas. First things first, though, before I do dive into the Q&A, I do want to bring to everyone's attention an informational website that was created just a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to share my screen shortly. This is at marincounty.gov/programs/Bolinas-wastewater. And what this website or web page rather is meant to be is your go-to resource for a weekly status update of where we are in this process. Not only an overview of what's happening, but kind of this current status as things might change a little bit from week to week so that you can understand what those changes are, and especially progress on that response as we learn more about the issue at hand. We also we do plan to host more of these virtual town halls in the near future, so we will announce details about those here on this webpage, as well as provide links to previous recordings of town halls, again, for anybody that is unable to attend one in live format. Finally, at the end, you'll see that we've developed a frequently asked questions section, and we're continuing to update this as new questions come in from the public. We've divided up into kind of categories to make it a little bit easier to navigate because there are quite a few questions in there that we've developed. And so as you continue to submit questions, and likely some of the ones we addressed tonight will be added to this, this will be updated. So do check back from time to time to see if maybe a question that's top of mind for you is there. And then we do have some additional helpful resources, and most importantly, a way to contact us with questions if you do have any that aren't answered by the FAQ, and perhaps it's the next town hall is 2 weeks away, you don't want to wait. So we do want to let you know that this resource is here for you to answer those questions and concerns you may have, especially as we continue long into the future on this response. So for fun, I always like to know who's with us in the audience. It really helps us really think about, as we think about answering some of these questions, where you're coming from when you answer these questions. So I'm going to put a poll on the screen right now. It's very simple. Just where are you from? There's 3 options. Are you a resident of Bolinas? Maybe you live somewhere else in West Marin, or maybe you're joining us from outside West Marin. So we'll give everybody just a couple seconds to answer that to understand who's with us this evening. All right, I'll give it another 6-7 seconds for the final selections to come in. And in the words of Steve Harvey, survey says, the majority are from Bolinas, and that's no surprise. And most importantly, we're really glad you're here with us tonight to get answers to your questions. So in case you're wondering, there's the results. But we certainly welcome those that are from elsewhere in West Marin, as well as outside West Marin as well. Okay, so the format for tonight's town hall will be a question and answer format. And as I mentioned earlier, at this point, there's still a lot of information that we're seeking to find. So there may be a few questions that we just truthfully can't answer because we don't have the information we need or the data yet. But again, we're going to do our very best to answer what we can as we continue to pursue more information in the matter. There were quite a few that submitted questions in advance by email. And so to get the show rolling, if you will, we're going to start with those questions. However, if you do have a question that's on your mind and you haven't already submitted it, you can do so by using the Q&A button at the base of your screen. Just click that Q&A symbol and then type your question into the text box and hit send. And then we will start working those questions into the list of existing questions of folks that already came in. Just one moment. And I do want to acknowledge we have Supervisor Dennis Rodoni with us. And so I am going to go ahead and let him address everyone in just a moment. Supervisor Rodoni, can you hear us?
I can. How are you?
I'm doing
I
well.
don't see my video though. I guess that's okay.
Yeah, let me see what I can do about that. Just a moment.
There we go.
Is it working for you now?
I think I'm here. There we go.
Okay,
Thank you, Lainey.
there you are.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Lainey. Thank you, Chris. Thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. This is an update on what we know what's going on at this point. And as Lainey said, there's still a lot to be learned. So we're asking everyone to remain patient as we work through this process. And I do want to thank you for attending tonight and asking your questions. So I look forward to hearing the answers.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Rodoni. It's a pleasure to have you join us. And so with that, I am going to introduce who will be joining us this evening for our panel of experts and question answerers. Obviously, we want to thank again Supervisor Rodoni for being here and lending his voice. We also have with us Choo, who is the Assistant Director for the Marin County Community Development Agency. And then joining us, hopefully a little bit down the road, will be Dr. Lisa Santora, who many of you know. She's our Public Health Officer for Marin County Health and Human Services. She was pulled away momentarily due to a family matter, but she does intend on joining us as soon as she can. So she will be a bit late, but we have plenty of questions that Chris is capable of answering in the meantime. So don't worry, we won't have to pause everything until Dr. Santora joins us. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and actually hand it over to Chris to kick things off, to give us a little bit of a status update of where we are in this process. What do we know? What's kind of going on right now? And then we can start to dive into questions after that.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you again for joining us tonight. This town hall really is to address the questions and answers from the community around this issue. As Lainey said, I'm Chris Choo. I'm the Assistant Director for the Community Development Agency. I don't think I've met most of you, so this is the first introduction. Just wanted to give you a little bit of background on me and my work. I started with CDA only late last year, but I've been in the Department of Public Works for 16 years prior. So doing a lot of watershed, flood, sea level rise work for the county, but also in West Marin. And prior to that, definitely had some experience doing water quality monitoring for environmental purposes. So this is not completely unfamiliar, but on a different scale altogether from what I've experienced in the past. So with that, I'll just roll into a little bit of a status update. Not much has changed. For those of you who were on the Bolinas Civic Group meeting a few weeks ago, you've heard, and probably all of you at this point have now heard that this problem was discovered during a routine inspection. What was noticed was liquid seepage coming out from the bluffs. And when investigated further, we found indications that there was bacteria in that seepage. Testing it further, it did test very high for a number of different sewage-related bacterial sources. So that resulted in the closure of the beach. I want to be super clear here. The beach is closed along the bluffs between Canyon and Rosewood. And so that is the area of the beach closure. The reason for that beach closure is because we are seeing seepage coming from multiple points along that stretch of beach. And there's the map. We're seeing multiple places where seepage is coming out from the bluffs and coming down towards the beach. In some cases, pooling at the beach. In other cases, just kind of, it's just sort of a damp area. This is obviously a time of the year where we don't expect to see a lot of liquid and a lot of wet soils and sand along that stretch. And so, again, because we know that this is highly contaminated wastewater, we did want to make sure that people, pets, others were not in contact with that portion of the beach. The beach at Agate is still open. The beach down closer to downtown and the channel has been open. And we will kind of continue to be keeping this portion of the beach closed as long as there is visual seepage coming out of the bluffs. And separately, we are continuing kind of our regular recreational beach water quality monitoring program, which happens countywide. And that location for Bolinas is right at the channel. And that site is monitored once a week between the months of April and October. And so that's what closed an additional stretch of beach 2 weeks ago. And as of last week, that had tested clean. And again, we get weekly test results most weeks. There's a few hiccups where we have holidays and the lab's closed, but otherwise we're testing that weekly, and that will be noticed as we have that information. So that's a little bit of background. We are still, we given kind of the stretch of beach that we're seeing the seepage, we're fairly certain this isn't just one or two failed systems. It seems like enough seepage that it's probably a larger problem. And so we are trying to assess what our next steps are, how we approach this. We realize this has impacts for all of the community. It has impacts for visitors. It has impacts for the county at large. So we're carefully walking through what we should do. We've consulted with others. We've talked to some of the state and federal agencies, local partners, and we are trying to cautiously move forward. So that is, I think, a bit of the status. And maybe now I'll just pause and we can either go to questions or we can continue down kind of the information to date. Ooh, Lainey, you're muted.
Wow, I don't usually make that mistake. Thank you. So, unless you have any other things on a status update that you want to share, we could go ahead and dive into some questions. There are some questions actually related to what you just talked about the water testing and things like that. So maybe that's a good place for us to start.
Sure.
So I think you mentioned that the water is typically tested at the channel. One of the questions that we received earlier this week is, will more testing locations be added given this now wastewater issue that we're aware of?
Yeah, so the program that we have to monitor the beach water quality is an annual program. We're collecting data and building on that data year after year. It's also funded by a grant and staffed by some volunteers. And so at this time, we don't have plans to expand that to include more test sites. But we do have the consistent test site at the mouth of Bolinas Lagoon. We have 3 additional test sites along Stinson Beach, and those will continue to be monitored. I think as we determine our next steps, we can certainly look at what our other options are. But as of right now, our commitment is to continue this regular testing, demonstrate, and build on years of data collection that we have for the site.
Okay, that's helpful. I know that this testing program that you mentioned, it's grant funded, run by volunteers, typically goes from early April to late October. Again, given what we know about the situation in Bolinas, would the testing be extended perhaps at Bolinas beyond that October date for monitoring purposes, or would that be advantageous to do?
We are looking into that at this time, and so more information will come as we hear back. But as of right now, we're still in the middle of that testing season, and we'll certainly continue through the end of October.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. I'm looking forward to hearing more about possible extensions for sure. A couple of weeks ago, I know that in addition to what was closed on the beach, the other parts that you mentioned were open were under an advisory because the beach water quality, I guess it surpassed thresholds for bacteria, but then the following week it was fine. And so I'm no ocean expert, and so maybe I'm assuming maybe there's a few folks in this meeting too that are in the same boat. Can you give us a little bit of insight about why seawater can be, flagged as contaminated or high bacterial levels 1 week, and then the next week, fine, go swim in it? So can you give us a little insight on that?
Yeah, there's a number of different factors at play here. We are testing water in the Pacific Ocean, and while it is at a consistent location in Bolinas, it's a big source of water. And as all of you are probably familiar, when you're out in the ocean, there's tides, there's currents. We're right there at the mouth of Bolinas Lagoon, so depending on whether or not it's a high or low tide, we're not consistently trying to test the same tide event, so we're not adjusting our testing times to meet that same tidal condition. And so it's a number of different factors that really influence what we collect. For the size of the Pacific Ocean, we're collecting a small sample of water and sending that to the lab. It really is a snapshot in time and really just a general indicator of safety and relative health of relative safety for recreational contact. It is not intended to be an all-encompassing set of information, and we can get that variability. One of the nice things about consistent monitoring year after year is that we do kind of see, these sites consistently test clean or consistently test dirty. They give us information so that we can actually go out and look into problems further. And so one good thing about this, and it may just be the location, it may be, the currents, is that we're not consistently seeing problematic water quality at Bolinas. The last time I think the beach was closed at Bolinas, in that weekly closure, was last year. And so we have sites that will test positive, test high multiple times during the year. We certainly, if you follow the environmental health, there's a mailing list as well as a website to kind of follow all of these beach testing sites. You'll see some of them have routine closures and others don't. There's also a larger statewide effort to test beach water quality. And again, this ends up being the cleanest beaches in the state, the dirtiest beaches in the state headlines. But again, we're trying to test and build on this consistent database for recreational safety.
That's great. That's good information. I mean, I've seen the website where, you log each week and that sort of thing, but that it makes sense to have all that documented to look for trends. That's great. And I think you mentioned this, but I'm just looking at one of our next questions about whether tests are performed during high tide. And it sounds like that may vary depending on what time of day that they're collecting the sample.
Yeah, that tidal cycle is constantly shifting. And so, it's, again, we're collecting it when it works for the volunteers and when it works for, safety and all of that and access. So it's not consistent at the same tide event every week, but it is a consistent weekly test.
Right. Now actually, I'm going to wait for Dr. Santora on this next question because I think it kind of blends into public health. And I think we've answered the question about where samples were taken and the sampling date. So it is weekly. There is a link on that webpage that I referenced earlier that takes you to the Marin County Environmental Health Services webpage, where they actually list not only for Bolinas, but for all of their sampling sites, what the test results have been the last few weeks and where advisories have been issued. So if you're interested in learning more about that, also under the additional resources, I think there's a button to beach water quality testing. So highly recommend that you go visit that webpage because there's a lot of really good information about what they look for and how it works and all of that. Let's see. Now here's an interesting question that just came in. We know that tides change, as you've already talked about. Wouldn't the contamination that we're experiencing, I assume this is because of tidal changes, please pardon me, whoever wrote this question, will eventually spread and contaminate to our local beach. So how do we know if it's safe for our children to play at the beach?
Well, I think following that weekly recreational contact testing site is one good place to go for information. That's testing that's backed by data, or information backed by data. It says that at least for that week it tested clean. I think in terms of the larger issue, and just kind of what's collecting and how this is all moving, I can say that the Pacific Ocean is a large body of water, and there is a lot happening that, you can see and that you can't see directly. And so, we will keep the beach closed below the bluffs because we can actively see seepage coming out, and that seepage has been tested. Not the ocean water necessarily, but that seepage has been tested, and it's tested high. So we will maintain that closure because of that public safety hazard. But as far as the larger Pacific Ocean, it's hard to know exactly what's happening once that water enters the ocean. Certainly there's, it's percolating through the sand, it's going sometimes directly in. But it is kind of showing up in different ways and in different test results. It's hard to pinpoint all of that to that test result that we're collecting weekly.
Yeah, that makes sense. We have a question that's come in asking about who has been involved in the testing of the water safety off the closed section of Bolinas Beach, or are there other agencies we can get involved to support the testing? So I know you mentioned this somewhat in your opening statement, but I don't know if you want to elaborate a bit more on what testing is happening. I know we talked a lot about ocean water testing, so I don't know if we want to also talk about the wastewater seepage and testing there as well.
Yes, I can share a little bit about that. We have, as I mentioned, a few weeks ago when this problem was first identified, we had some test strips. These are just quick field tests to indicate ammonia, which is one of the indicators of wastewater. And so we had those. Those were just conducted on site right then and there. We collected additional samples, and this was, when I say we here, it is Community Development Agency Environmental Health, collected some additional samples and had those sent to the lab. And those were the ones that initially that we had that tested so high that resulted in the beach closure on September 6th. For now, those tests are not happening on a recurring basis because we have a good indication that that seepage is problematic. We did, however, last week get the regional board, which is one of our state agencies. The Regional Water Quality Control Board wanted to test to verify that the source of all of these pathogens was human. So when you're doing these tests, you understand that there's bacterial contamination in that water. And when it's really high, that's when it's problematic. It can make you sick. But there's birds, there's wildlife, there's all sorts of different contributing factors. And we don't usually test at a level to identify whether or not this is human caused. So the regional board did come out last week to collect some additional samples to confirm that this is a human source. We don't yet have those lab results. It's a more complex test. And so when those lab results come back, we will post that information. But again, this is just to indicate largely that it is human versus, birds, other wildlife, in that seepage.
No, that makes sense. And actually we had a question come in about 10 minutes ago on that very question, like, how do you know this is human sewage versus wildlife sewage versus whatnot? So that's helpful. Here is an interesting question. And I don't know if the county is going there, but I'm going to throw it out there in respect to the person who answered it. If we do determine that it is human sewage, is there any effort to do DNA tests to identify the responsible people? You don't know. That's tough.
Watching so many crime dramas and everything.
Well, and I kind of get nervous because I don't live in Bolinas, but I do enjoy visiting Bolinas from time to time. And if I have to use the restroom there and my DNA comes out, am I held responsible for this? I don't know. So with that, Chris, any thoughts or any intel yet on the additional testing we might be looking at down the road, or is it too early to tell?
I think, well, one, I can't actually, I'm not sure that that testing is available and that we would actually pursue anything like that at this point. What I can say is, what we're hearing, what we're learning in the weeks since we closed the beach is that this seems like an ongoing problem. We've uncovered studies that were done decades ago. We're realizing that this has been an ongoing issue. I think the goal here is really to address the health concerns. So you know, keeping that beach closed where we actually have that contaminated water coming out and being exposed, and looking at how we address the larger issues. And this is a complex problem. There are no easy quick fixes. So you know, really starting to identify kind of, you know, what's going on, and longer term, working with all of you. This is not something that, you know, I'm doing on my own. This is not something the county is taking on by itself, but really starting to think about, you know, what is that longer term solution. I don't think this is about, even if we could, I don't think this is about going to that level of DNA testing and identification, but it is looking at how do we address something on the scale of this problem. So we'll be coming back and looking for input and you know, some additional community conversations about all of this. But at this point, we don't have, we certainly don't have that testing in our plans.
Certainly, no, that makes good sense. But fun question nonetheless. Speaking of kind of going from that and dovetailing over into closures, also recognizing we have had maybe a dozen people join us since we started. You talked a little bit earlier about the areas of the beach that are closed. And I think you touched on this earlier, but I'd like to state this question that was submitted just to make it very plainly known. When the term is used, beach closure, do people assume it's just that portion of the beach where there is seepage and not the ocean water? Or is that a bad interpretation?
You know, what we have done is based on what we have, you know, seen and confirmed, which is seepage coming from the bluffs, making its way down to the beach. We have closed the beach. And again, that closure is between Rosewood and Canyon. So it's that portion of the bluffs, often at high tide, or just that, you know, higher tide is inaccessible. It is that portion of the beach that we've closed off because we know and we can see that the contaminated sources of water coming out from those bluffs. I would say that in terms of what that means for the larger ocean and whether or not you should be in the ocean in that stretch, to proceed at your own risk. I think you can see the data that we've collected. You can see information on the routine beach testing. And again, given that this is a large open body of water here, you know, there's a bit of geography that kind of just with Bolinas, you know, with Bolinas and the lagoon, but you know, largely this is the Pacific Ocean. This isn't you know, a portion of the bay. I would say proceed at your own risk because it's right there. But you know, the closure is really to keep people off of that stretch of beach, walking on that stretch of beach where that contaminated liquid is making its way to the sand.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes good sense. There is a question that came in about the closure and there being some confusion because supposedly there's no signage at the beach or minimal signage. And you know, that I'm not a frequent person that goes there all the time, but the few times I have been to Bolinas, it is kind of interesting topography. So I don't know if that plays into it or what, but can you please like elaborate on what environmental health has done to notify beachgoers about it and if there's been any problematic issues with the signage?
Yeah, and I welcome the supervisor to unmute as well and share, but what I can say is that we tried to post signage where the beach was most accessible. And so there is signage at the end of Brighton, and there is signage at Agate Beach, at the county beach. And on those signs, we have additional language on there that says the beach is closed from Rosewood to Canyon. So it's not necessarily starting at Brighton, but we are trying to notify people where they can access the beach. Beach is really difficult or more difficult to access from the closure area. So we're, again, trying to target where people are coming into the beach. And there are still portions of the beach that are open when you see those signs. And so we're trying to, you know, direct people to staying on the open, you know, uncontaminated portions of beach in terms of that seepage. We have had signs posted up onto the bluffs a bit. And I can't confirm whether or not all those signs remain. Certainly at a really high tide, those signs could be subject to being washed away. They could have, you know, the bluffs do erode, and so I'm not sure if they're all still there, but we did try and post a few signs in that closure area. But again, hopefully having signage posted at Agate and at Brighton really limits and makes people aware where they're gonna actually access that beach where the beach is closed. If folks have ideas of additional signage locations, places we can post information, we welcome that. We do have the website that Lainey mentioned at the beginning of this call. And I should also, I should not fail to mention that if you do have any kind of health effects from being in the water, being at the beach, and you think that it might be related to this issue, we do have a public health form that can be submitted with kind of what happened, where you were, because we do want to collect that information. We haven't heard of too many concerns related to contact, but we are trying to keep track of that information as well. And Supervisor, I don't know if you have additional thoughts, or I know you've been out there more frequently.
Thanks, Chris, for the opportunity. I think you covered it. You know, we're trying to cover the entry to the area that we're trying to protect and trying to warn people. And so I was out there Monday. The sign is at the beginning of Brighton, but if you read the sign, it clearly says Canyon to Agate Beach. So I think it's just informational. And then there are additional signs as you go down the beach if you bump into those areas where we do have some contamination. So at this point, I think it's an early warning to people. Tell them they may not want to think twice about going that direction because there is a problem further down the beach. And as you said, it's pretty inaccessible when the tides are in.
Definitely. Thank you for that, Supervisor. Chris, I'm going to give you a moment to catch your breath because we've actually had a couple of questions come in about communications and public information. And so I will be happy to take those for a second. And while people are also, we've had a ton of questions coming in, we're going to do our best to get through those. Do know that you only need to submit once. We're going through and just grabbing them as quickly as you can. So I've seen a couple people, I doubt that they would be worded exactly the same. So if you've entered yours a couple times, know that we got it and we're getting to it. So first of all, one of the questions that came in is, will there be follow-up information or engagement with the media as it relates to what exactly is open or as conditions change at the beach? And the answer is absolutely yes. We understand that it's important for there to be clarity about what is available, what is open, and especially if we are at some point in the future able to open more. Not only do we know that Bolinas is a treasured recreational gem and an environmental gem for Bolinas residents, but we get that it's an economic driver as well. And so we certainly want to get the word out so that folks that, you know, want to take surf school or enjoy something great to eat or just look out and enjoy the lagoon, they can do that and not be dismayed by whatever is in the media. Especially if there's misinformation, which leads me to the next question that was submitted. And I want to thank this person for submitting this. What has been done to address that Daily Mail article? And I want to assure you that made me just as mad as it made you. Part of my responsibility as a communications director for the county is to make sure that information that our media partners put out there is accurate. And there are times when something will be said that is factually inaccurate. Maybe they got a number wrong, a stat wrong, or the way in which they phrase things could change the meaning of a potential ordinance or a potential action on behalf of the board. So it's not unusual for me to reach out to an outlet to say like, hey, this is actually a little misleading. Can we work together to correct it? In the case of the Daily Mail, I've had to be pretty aggressive, but I'm happy to say that just this afternoon, I finally did get a response from the reporter, and hopefully we will connect with the editor tomorrow to see what can be done to correct the record about that article, because obviously the entire beach is not closed, and most importantly, no one from the county has forecasted a 3-year closure. So those are two pieces of misinformation that we are striving to correct. I can't undo the damage of what has been done so far, but I can certainly pledge that I will try to get that corrected, and then of course continue to put out updated information to our media partners as new updates come available. All right, so with that, Supervisor Rodoni, since you are here, This might be a question, I don't know. It's pretty early, I recognize in all of this, but maybe you do have some insight on what could be done. The question has come in is what, if anything, is the county doing or can be offered by the county to support businesses that have been impacted by this closure? I don't know if there's insight yet, I know I've heard that maybe there's some wheels turning, but I don't want to speculate. I'm not involved at the tables that you are involved at.
Sure. And currently, we don't have anything in place, but we certainly are trying to ascertain what the impacts of the earlier entire beach closure versus now the smaller portion of the beach. We're hoping that through some messaging that we can share that one Bolinas beach is not totally closed and that the community is still open to please visit the community and please visit the businesses. That's sort of in the short term. In the long term, we really need to understand what the impacts are. So we'll certainly be hearing from some of our businesses to figure out what that is. We can also work with the federal government and the state government if they have programs, but at this point, we're not aware of whether that's available.
That makes perfect sense. And I look forward to more information becoming available as we do sort this out. With that, I want to pause and welcome Dr. Lisa Santora, who just messaged me and said her camera is not cooperating, but we know and love your voice. So we know it's you, I think. Is that you, Dr. Lisa?
This is me,
Yes.
There we go. Audio is working, but video is down.
I'm sorry to hear that your video is down, but we're really glad that you're here in light of, circumstances that maybe caused you to be a bit delayed today. We're just really glad that you're here. With that, if you need a moment, Dr. Lisa, I could certainly get back into Q&A, but also wanted to pause and give you the opportunity. I didn't know if there was any sort of status update you wanted to share from a public health standpoint. I did want to just clarify that Chris did give a nice kickoff at the start, kind of saying where we are in terms of additional testing that has taken place, kind of what we are looking into in terms of next steps, but that we all agree that unfortunately at this point, there's still more questions and answers until we get some more information about, really what's causing this and what possibly could be done to resolve it.
Yeah, I'll just I'll piggyback off of Supervisor Rodoni and say that we really understand how critical the beach is to the community and want to be able to provide timely and transparent information around beach. Everyone can have the information they need to make decisions about how they use the beach water and where they can use the beach water. We're still waiting to hear back from California Department of Public Health. We have our normal recreational water testing go through November and in a specific spot, but we're seeking guidance from the state around the location and the frequency of testing that will extend beyond the November season. So that's the update. And again, we truly appreciate and value what a treasure the beach is to the community, and also want to make sure that we're protecting the health and safety of the community as well as our top priority.
Excellent. Thanks for that. All right, we're going to go ahead and keep going with questions. For those that maybe joined us a little bit late, we are doing a Q&A based town hall this evening, answering as many questions as we can. If you haven't already, you can submit a question via the Q&A button at the base of your screen. We have had a lot of questions come in, so I don't know that we are going to be here all night, but we're going to keep moving as fast as we can to try to get through these, and again, try to answer your questions and concerns. So with that, I think I'm going to head back to Chris for a bit. We have, we talked about concern or thinking that that some of the septic systems rather on the Mesa might be contributing to this issue. And so there have been a few questions that have come in regarding septic. I don't know, Chris, if this is something that you can address, but I'll lob the questions your way. And if it's not within your realm, let me know and we can save those for maybe the FAQ online. So one of the questions that has come in is, are you going to be recommending that people on the Big Mesa get their septic tanks cleaned out before the rains start?
Yeah, we are still assessing kind of what the recommendations are for the community at large. Obviously, all as residents and as homeowners, renters, You're intimately familiar probably with your septic system. Certainly we have guidance, general guidance about best management practices. We know that in Bolinas, as in many other places across Marin, that the septic systems are in many different states of, construction. They're recent, they're quite old. And so, and we also realize that it's a big critical piece of kind of the livability of the property. You need to have that functioning system. So, we have that information. We would certainly encourage anyone who's concerned about the state of their septic, is it my septic that's causing this problem, to go ahead and we can certainly walk through what good maintenance looks like, what kinds of inspections and what kinds of information you might be able to get from hiring independent septic service to look at your system. As of right now, we're still kind of assessing what those next steps look like and what guidance we offer. The county does at the public counter, the public permit counter for CDA, we do have a disclosure notice that has been posted and is available to anyone who comes in with a project or proposed project anywhere on the Big Mesa, on the gridded Mesa, just to let folks know that this is happening and that we don't know what's next. And we don't have a moratorium. We don't have, any specific guidance just yet, but that this is as I mentioned, probably a larger problem. And so certainly would encourage anyone who has any concerns to go ahead and take those proactive steps, especially if you're not certain about the state of your system. But as of right now, we'll kind of keep the community posted as we work out how best to approach a problem at this scale.
Okay, thank you. Speaking of kind of inspections, does the county do routine inspections of any individual septic systems?
Yeah, we do. And what triggers that is kind of that proactive, coming in to get a permit, improving your system, that then kind of allows for kind of a state of the state, I guess, of the septic, what kind of system you have. When folks come in to improve their system, they may be able to permit a system that is that is basically a class 1 versus a class 2 system. And so we have different inspection requirements for those systems, but it is kind of dependent on, kind of coming in and going through that permitting process. So we don't otherwise just come out and inspect all the systems, but there is no program. Just like any other building issue, that we don't go out and proactively do that.
Okay, that makes sense. Not so stepping away from the septic systems, but looking at potential causes. There's a question about whether or not erosion of the cliffs might be a contributing factor. Do we know anything yet, or is it still too early to tell?
I think we know that the bluffs are eroding, and that this has been an ongoing natural, certainly a natural state of things for these kinds of bluffs in general. Whether or not this is directly related, whether or not this is made worse, whether or not this is partially causing what we're seeing with the seepage is not yet known.
Okay, makes sense. Let's see. Gosh, there's so many questions. So this is going back to, I believe, the wastewater. Sorry, the ocean water testing that we've been talking about for quite a bit of time, which people love our local beaches, so no wonder. And it sounds like a request. Can we get more details about where exactly all the testing sites are, and also the results of the test? So it sounds like maybe bacteria levels or something like that. Are those published online already, or is that something that could be made available to the public?
So that weekly recreational water contact testing, so the recreational beach monitoring that we do from April to the end of October, that is posted online. There is a map. You can see the locations of each of those test sites. And as I mentioned, there is one at more or less at the mouth of the lagoon at the channel. There are 3 on Stinson Beach, and those are kind of the ones nearby. But then there are many more beach locations across Marin County. And so those have a map. Those also have the results. There is an email list, and you can get the lab results, I think, sent to you as part of that. Lab results are really, really challenging to understand, but there is certainly that simplified version online, and there's more information if folks are interested in diving in. And that is linked through our marincounty.gov/programs/Bolinas-wastewater website.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I just made a note to maybe find some of those links and make sure that they're added to the Bolinas wastewater webpage as well. So folks that want to take a deep dive on the results, and there's both an interactive Google-like map, and there's a PDF map as well about where all of those testing sites are around the county. So we'll make sure that that gets added for you, since there have been a couple of questions here about test locations and specific data. Let's see, I believe we've answered that one already. Okay, here's an interesting one there, and Supervisor Rodoni, you may want to weigh into this one if appropriate. Well, actually, I guess this is mostly Chris, so you're off the hook. There are more and more campers parked along the Bolinas Lagoon along Highway 1. What are you doing, if anything, to protect these waters from that human wastewater?
I may have to actually lean on Supervisor Rodoni if he knows more about this topic than I do. I'm to say I'm not familiar.
Yeah, I'm familiar with campers on the Bolinas side of the lagoon. That number has been reduced from 2 to 1 through efforts through the Marin County Sheriff's Office and the homeless outreach team. We're continuing to work with the existing RV participant there and hoping to get him into a program too. But if you may have noticed, because of the new 72-hour rule where you have to move 500 feet, the footprint of this individual has gotten a lot smaller, and he is moving every 72 hours, and sheriff's deputies are making sure that happens. On the other side of the lagoon, I haven't noticed regular RVs there. I haven't noticed an occasional person that pulls over there for the evening, and we don't have any rules in place that would prohibit that, essentially, unless they're there for longer than that 72-hour stretch. But if there are issues on the other side of the lagoon, probably someone should tell us about it if they're seeing someone there on a regular basis or an ongoing basis, because I'm not aware of that right now. But I do know about the ones on the Bolinas side, and we are working with them to get them into a housing program.
And I'll just add to Supervisor Rodoni, we'll reach out to our homelessness and coordinated care team in HHS and our West Marin Services Center just to make sure that we are synced up with any emerging needs. We had a similar concern on Binford Road, which is also an unincorporated area, again, about making sure we're protecting the wetlands from human waste in that space. So I'll make sure to bring that back to our teams so we can assess the situation and determine any next steps. And so thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Santora, for closing that loop. Chris, you're very popular. There's another question for you, or at least Dr. Santora, you might be able to weigh into this, but I know that this is a follow-up to a statement that Sarah Jones, who's the director of the Community Development Agency, made just 2 weeks ago. And it was picked up in that Daily Mail article that we all reference. And that is a reference to a stat of roughly 43,000 gallons of sewage are seeping from the cliffs per day. And so a couple of people have asked about this, kind of where did that number come from? Is that accurate, or was that speculation on behalf of the media? That sort of thing. So if you have just additional information about where Sarah arrived at that stat.
Yeah, I can offer a little bit there. It was a rough estimate, and we have done that visual inspection of the part of the beach that's now closed. So again, from Canyon to Rosewood, kind of saw all that seepage coming down, and it was an estimate kind of to get at sort of a quantity. But that it's just an estimate. It's from kind of the seepage we saw when we were out there that week. That could change, it could diminish, it could increase. We are not standing by those numbers in any substantial way to say that is the entirety of the problem. It was kind of just a best guess at kind of getting at a quantity that might be making its way to the ocean.
Okay, thanks for that. I am going to acknowledge a couple of not questions, but suggestions that have come in around kind of clarifying, I guess you could say, where exactly the beach is open and closed. And so, yes, we will put a map on the webpage. And we also appreciate the suggestion of as additional closure signage is added at the access points of the beach, if you could also clarify what is actually open. Great suggestion, and we can certainly work with the team to, when the next round of signs need to go out, that happens. So a follow-up question on the septic systems. I know we were talking about it earlier. Now you said that it's a permitting process that triggers an inspection of septic systems. In light of what is happening, or what has been discovered rather, in Bolinas, are there active plans to go out and start inspecting all of these septic systems?
There are no plans yet. As I mentioned, I think right now we're still trying to get a handle on kind of the scope and scale, what kind of resources are available, what our next steps might look like. This is really unprecedented, and we also are very much aware, like I said earlier, the impact of potentially a failed system, potentially a problematic system, and there are many homes on the mesa. And so, we are navigating this very carefully. We don't want to make assumptions. We don't want to rush into a plan. So you will be hearing from us as we develop more guidance, as we develop a path forward. We'll be certainly coming back to the community to ask if this, for input and for suggestions. But as of right now, we don't have that plan to do that wide scale inspection. I did actually just want to follow up, and since this is a one-way conversation, I am really curious. So we have tried to post signage, and the supervisor and I both kind of tried to explain what we've tried to do. You've heard me multiple times today say that the beach is closed between Canyon and Rosewood. I'm curious if that information is sufficient for folks to understand what part of the beach is closed. It's really hard to put signage on the beach because of the tides and the fact that this stretch of beach is subject to high tide. But if there's something else we can do, including would a map help on the signs? Would it help to kind of provide more information? Is this not the language that beachgoers are going to understand when we have the sign, when we have the closure about the streets up above the beach? Rather than the beach itself. So any additional suggestions, please put that in the Q&A for us, and we can certainly incorporate that. We are definitely trying to work with what we have and knowing where people currently access the beach. But again, if you have thoughts about additional access points between that stretch, and if you have comments and thoughts about how we can better message this for everyone who's coming out to the beach, we'd really appreciate that.
I will actually jump in and say, only because this Q&A is amazing and I'm worried we're going to be here till 9. If you have just a suggestion, you can put it in the Q&A. You can also go to that webpage and use that contact form and give us a much more detailed suggestion too, if you have a lot of stuff to share. I will say, Chris, it sounds like maps are definitely something I'm seeing come in a lot. I've had a couple of people already say, I don't go to the beach that often. So when you say, Brighton to whatever, it doesn't resonate with me. So it sounds like maps are something that would be very helpful, but we certainly welcome your feedback, whether it's through the Q&A or again, through that web form on that web page. So thank you for that.
And Lainey, we're gonna also take all the Q&A that people are submitting, and we'll certainly do our best to answer questions. We'll also be back, as Lainey mentioned earlier, in a few weeks. We're gonna try and find some regular Q&A that we can host with the community so that we can continue to answer these questions as they come up. But please do put your questions in the chat, and we will certainly do our best to respond and get that information again back up on that FAQ section of the website.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Yeah, it probably sounded like I was saying, don't add your questions, and that's not what I meant. Perfect. So, I've got another question with regard to, testing, and I think you may have touched on this, Chris, earlier when you said that people can sign up to get more detailed, but the question is with regard to, like, is it possible to understand, this person obviously knows science, and I'm gonna butcher these names right now, I'm gonna say that right now, including the ppm for E. coli and total coliform, and a lot of other things that would make it under or above recreational limits. So is that the kind of information they would get if they signed up for that subscription service that you referenced?
Yeah, and
Okay.
the environmental health, the recreational beach website does post kind of what our limits are for safe contact. And I believe they're state standards, so they're not variable. And it is for E. coli, total coliform, and for enterococcus. So those three things are routinely tested. We have limits for both saltwater for the marine situation as well as freshwater, because we do have freshwater recreation access points as well. And so there's kind of two columns for what's safe. And then every week for all those sites that we test, we post those results. And so it's a great place to go. Just generally, it's a great place to go if you love water and you're in the water in Marin or near the water. It's a great place just to kind of understand what's happening.
Excellent. Okay. Let's see. Now, some of the questions that are coming in, I realize that some people may have joined late. I know that you've answered some of these, but just for the sake of somebody that missed it, if you want to recap kind of what steps are being taken to determine the source of the seepage. I know you talked about that early on, but just another recap, because we have had a couple of new questions come in, fresh submissions on that same question.
Yeah, right now what we've seen and what we've the information we have is that there is seepage coming from the bluffs, and that stretch of bluffs that has that seepage is about a mile. I think it's about a mile long. It's basically that stretch again between Canyon and Rosewood, and indications and certainly kind of the quantity of the seepage to us signifies that it's more than just one or two failed systems. Right now, we are trying to assess how best to respond, and working with our state and federal partners. We've reached out to Fish and Wildlife, we've reached out to Gulf of the Farallones, but then we're also working with the Regional Water Quality Control Board. They're the entity that has the most experience and has kind of the knowledge around these types of issues, to kind of map out what makes sense in terms of what do you do when it's not just one or two systems. We're looking at some case studies. Dr. Santora has been really helpful, looking not only at the state, but also across the country at similar problematic issues. And we are approaching this, with, again, not only the environmental concern, there is a clear environmental concern here, but also understanding that this is a community of residents, of people who live in this place. And we need to come up with an approach that is sound and that, doesn't assume blame, and really does think about kind of the big picture. So we are kind of going about that right now, and we will be returning to the community with that information and kind of what our next steps might look like, and share that with the community as we continue to move forward. We don't have a lot that's mapped out and planned just yet. We're still very much in kind of the figuring out how to approach the problem. And what exactly is the problem?
And I'll just share, we have a commitment to have a deep level of engagement with the community. We understand, and you can, Lainey can see by the questions, the expertise and the local knowledge. And this is a journey you all have been on and have been aware of for many years. And so we're really committed to working together with you, again, with the focus on protecting the health and safety of the community, but also recognizing how important the community is, and making sure there is co-creation of some of the mitigation strategies that are ahead of us. And so that's why there is this time, because we want to have a robust discovery process where we can truly understand the best strategies to engage the community and gather information from many of you who are probably on this phone call.
That sounds great. Dr. Santora and also Supervisor Rodoni, we have had a couple of other questions come in. You spoke earlier about a vehicle that was parked by the Bolinas Lagoon. Some other reports maybe of vehicles that have been parked, people living in vans or trailers or whatever for a long time. So in that, I would ask, what in that situation, how might the community best work alongside what your two offices can offer and in trying to be part of the solution of, finding services for those folks, or what, I mean, how, and what else is maybe happening in the community already as it relates to folks living in vehicles, if you're aware of them.
I would encourage everyone to, if they have any concerns about a specific individual or person, or a vehicle, you can call our number to our homelessness and coordinated care team. It's 1-415-473-HOME. And the number for home is 4663. So that's 415-4663. And that will connects directly to our homelessness and coordinated care division, which we can, our branch, and we can start again gathering information. And as I said earlier, we'll reach out to our West Marin Services Center so we can be synchronized and develop a deeper understanding of that. And we would expect that with some of the changes that we've seen with the Supreme Court and the impacts on encampments on the east side of our county, it's not unexpected to see a migration, honestly, to the west side of our county. So that's something I think I really appreciate it being brought up on this conversation. And I was already chatting back to our team so we can develop a plan for, again, just assessing and making sure we have our outreach team, like Supervisor Rodoni mentioned, that we have our outreach teams go out and start connecting individuals to the assessment process so they can get connected to housing and other supports.
That's great. And Dr. Santora, if you'll indulge me, I don't know if it happened for everybody else, but my audio cut out for just a quick second during that phone number. So if you don't mind repeating that phone number just one more time.
Sure, it's 415-473-HOME or 415-473-4663.
Okay, thank you.
And Lainey, I would just add that it's not new people living in our vehicles, especially in the Bolinas community. And we continue to monitor them. Mike Thompson from the Sheriff's Department is their homeless outreach specialist. And he almost knows every individual and where they're at. When it comes to the lagoon, county parks are there all the time, checking on people, making sure they're not doing incorrect things, including how they're dealing with their waste. And I'm pleased to say we haven't had a major issue arise with a lot of this today. And we're working really hard with the homeless team to find pathways to homes for these people. And, so we continue to work on that. It's a big challenge. And as Lisa says, there may be more pressure on West Marin as eastern cities take advantage of the recent Supreme Court ruling and push people around a little bit. But our main outreach is housing first and whole person care. And our goal is to get everyone into a home where the wraparound services so they can be the most successful. But as you know, West Marin, people that live in West Marin, even in their cars, love West Marin and want to stay in West Marin. So we don't have enough housing in West Marin to house everyone that's unhoused. So we need to work on that part too. And, but there are some challenges, but it's not new to West Marin to have people in their vehicles and living in their vehicles.
Yeah. Thank you, Supervisor Rodoni. All right, Chris, back to you. And question that just came in is, actually, I think it might be a typo. Has the county tested the water table on the Big Mesa, or are there plans to?
So, this is something that we did reach out as this was discovered. I mentioned this earlier, but we are understanding that this is a long-term problem and that this has been identified in the past. But one of the things we did, and Dr. Santora can add to this, is just reach out to folks that do have wells. We had certainly advised that if people were using those wells for domestic drinking, bathing, and or for irrigating, food gardens, that those wells should be tested. One of the things that we are starting to figure out and looking at the long history here is that one, there is that long history, finding those old reports, but also that there are some monitoring wells and locations that were referenced in those 1980s reports. And so we haven't done that testing, but I think certainly kind of looking at what is known and what was identified in the past, and has that, looking at that information, have things gotten better or worse? And, again, this is separate from the drinking water issue. For anyone who is on a well, I think looking at the larger mesa, we'll be looking to see kind of how we investigate this and where that water table intersects with potentially some of the seepage that we're seeing on the bluffs.
And I'll just follow up to that. Part of having well water, and if it's used as potable well water, is that testing should be part of your regular procedures in your house to ensure your household's health and safety. We know that well water testing can be expensive at the private level. We were able to find some resources online, and so there are conversations again, how can we scale up and support affordable well water testing for those who may need additional supports. So again, this is all part of our discovery phase and assessment phase, so we can make sure individuals who cannot afford the well water testing or don't have the means or ability are supported through this process.
And I don't think we've heard from folks at all that they have concerns for their domestic wells. But if you do, and we haven't yet heard from you, please do reach out, because if this is an urgent health issue, and you are using that well for drinking water inside your home, we do want to know and want to kind of help look into that testing and monitoring. Just like the septics, though, if again, with the wells as well as the septics, there should be routine inspections, there should be routine testing of the septic systems, there should be routine water quality monitoring of your drinking water supply if you are dependent on a well. And so certainly we encourage folks to take those steps, but knowing that there's this larger concern on the mesa right now, please do reach out through that contact form if you have a concern in Bolinas right now.
Okay, perfect. I will pass along a request that has come in a couple of times to check the drainage from Jack's Creek, which empties into Agate Beach. So I want to acknowledge it. A couple of people have put that in there. So thank you. We'll make a note of that. Let me ask you this. I've received a handful of questions, and we also got a couple of these earlier in the week from people who said, this isn't new. That some people in the community have supposedly known about this for some time, and there were reports at some time in the past, kind of saying that this is a problem or could happen. I'm not sure. I haven't seen the reports myself. And so there are questions kind of asking, why is the county getting involved now? Is it getting worse? Or, is it truly that the county didn't know? And, kind of shed a little light on that situation. And I will leave that to any of you, because I think that could apply in any direction, frankly.
I can start and just say, yes, I think it is clear the county, the big county, knew that this is a problem. We are discovering studies that were completed, that were done for the county. That being said, individuals, myself included, did not know about this problem until very recently. This was flagged during an inspection. That inspector was not aware of this problem until we kind of uncovered this larger concern. So we are acting on it now because we do know, and we are acting on it again, kind of in accordance to what we do know. So again, the beach is closed because we know that there's seepage making its way out onto the beach. We are not rushing to do the next things because we don't know the scale. We don't know exactly. We just know that there's enough seepage that it can't just be, an individual system coming out across a mile of bluff. But, we are trying to be thoughtful about how we proceed because there is a lot that is not yet now. But yes, the county as a whole somehow at some point was aware. Many of us that are there now were not around for that. I would say nearly all of us were not around for that and didn't have this knowledge going into this discovery a few weeks ago.
And I'll just follow up. It was exactly the same. We became aware in public health on, I think it was September 5th, is when we saw the visible seepage and a video, and that's the indication once there's visible sewage for a beach closure. And then we just followed along with our health and safety code.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'm just going to acknowledge there are a number of questions that came in about the Questa study and things like that. So this kind of addresses those questions versus hitting them all individually. I just want to be respectful of those that have submitted those related questions. There's another question. This goes back to water quality, and a lot of people are submitting questions anonymously, so I don't know if they were here at the beginning of the session or not to hear this. But it's a little bit about, that having a not self-awareness, but understanding that water quality can change. But basically the question is it safe to enter the water at any point between the channel and the canyon? And I don't know if you need additional follow-up on that to answer that, like more clarification of what they mean.
I think what I'll say is what I said earlier, which is, that you should proceed at your own risk. We do know, and we can see seepage coming from the bluffs, and it does in places make it all the way down to the sandy beach down below. But it is the Pacific Ocean. There is a huge dilution factor. There are waves, there are currents. It is very much, I think, an individual decision. I would say that the beach is closed in the stretch that I've now reiterated multiple times below the bluffs. And so in terms of access, in terms of walkability, that part of the beach is closed. I will not speculate on whether or not an individual, your child, a healthy adult should be in that water or not. I would certainly say that there are many of those decisions we make every day about many of the things that we do. And this is one of those things, that there is visible sewage seeping from the bluffs in that stretch of roughly a mile of beach. And so I would say that you should make your decision based on that knowledge.
Okay, thank you.
I couldn't have said it any better.
Yeah, very good. And make a public health expert out of you yet, Chris. So we've had a few more questions come up about Jack's Creek. I think they have lit a fire, which is okay because people are passionate about the health and safety of the beach. And so the question basically is, are other areas of the cliff and other areas of the beach being carefully looked, for other signs of wastewater, and maybe not the more obvious signs that we're seeing in the closure area? Are we testing any other sources of water that are emptying into these beaches just to make sure that we're not overlooking any additional seepage that could be happening? And I think this relates to kind of speculation that maybe the septics over near Jack's Creek, which empties into Agate Beach, could also be an issue. So is that sort of testing and investigation on Environmental Services radar?
I think the awareness is certainly there, and again, in stating that, this seems like a larger problem, stating that we're not sure of the scale and the scope and the exact dimensions of kind of where everything's coming from. We haven't yet pursued those additional tests. I think this was, again, waiting on a kind of a more comprehensive, how do we proceed? What do we need to do for health and safety? What do we need to do in terms of, looking at and identifying a problem area? And what do we need to do in terms of looking towards those solutions? I don't think this needs to be a witch hunt, but I do think that, we need to get at finding a way to address this larger issue. And, I think there is not an exact science in terms of how many septics are acceptable, how many function, and how much water do you have to use or not use in order for that to work out just right. So, you know, I think what we're trying to do right now is just to proceed with the information that we have enough to know that there's a problem, and chasing after, you know, individual systems or chasing after, you know, an ever growing situation is not our highest priority right now. It is to kind of come up with that comprehensive plan, and that'll help guide what we do and how we proceed with figuring out the scope and scale.
Chris, do we know how many septic systems are on the Mesa?
I don't have an exact number. You know, we do have, as the county, we do have a permit history. We also know that there's, you know, approximately 300 or so, you know, parcels. You know, and we know that the entire Mesa is on septic. So, you know, each of those homes, each of the, you know, in-law units and ADUs, you know, they're all on a septic. And so we know that, and that's plenty for us right now to kind of, again, scope what we should do next. And so that's what we're working with.
Okay, that's helpful. Oh, well, here's a fun question. I like this. What can the Bolinas community do right now to support, you know, this response, if you will?
I'm gonna turn, okay, I'm glad you unmuted, Supervisor.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to answer that. You know, I think it's important that Bolinas stay engaged and share some of the history perspective that the community has, because there's some long timers there, have a lot of knowledge on what's happening along this bluff. For example, the other day when I toured it, it was pointed out that there's a lot of springs along the bluff. There's a lot of watersheds, drainages that end up coming to the ocean along the bluff. And I do think that some of that local history would be helpful to, as we move forward, trying to understand what's going on. And I'm a big fan. I'll be pushing for some more testing on all these areas to really try and get some trends and some more data, because I think that'll be helpful too. But I think tapping into the local knowledge is really important, keeping them engaged. And then naturally, we have a very good partner and collaborator in the Bolinas Community Public Utility District. They're a trusted messenger in the community, and they have people on staff that are experts in this area because they run their wastewater treatment plant. And I think tapping into them and using them to help us do whatever we need to do going forward is a big advantage. But there is a lot of knowledge in the community, including, I see Lloyd Kahn is on this call, who wrote a book about septics in the 70s or 80s. So we probably should all read his book too. Thanks.
I would just also add, this is an opportunity to focus on climate change. We are thinking about our response in the context of what Bolinas can look like 40 years from now. And some of the factors that are ahead of us are things like erosion and sea level rise. And I was really impressed when we did present at the Bolinas Civic Group. We also saw a presentation on sea level rise. And so I think staying engaged, not only maintaining an awareness of what's happening now with this specific incident, and working together and sharing information, but also thinking more broadly about the impact of climate change on our communities and vulnerable areas, which includes West Marin. West Marin has been leaders in environmentalism, and I think our legacy in Marin County around environmentalism is based in West Marin and in Bolinas itself. And so I'm looking forward to what Bolinas can look like 40 years from now in a sustainable way as we address this current situation.
Excellent point. Excellent point. All right. We are starting to get some thank yous for taking the time to answer the questions. So we appreciate that feedback from all of you. We do know it's either past or getting close to past dinner time for many of you. So what I will do, again, I will kind of reiterate what Chris said earlier. We are taking note of the questions that are coming in. We've tried to, where there have been 3 or 4 similar questions, kind of group those together. So we'll go back and read those if for some reason there was a piece of a question that maybe we inadvertently missed. Or again, if you have follow-up questions once this Zoom ends, you can go to that webpage at any time, use that contact form to send us a note. We would love to respond. You know, give us a couple of days. And we've had a couple of questions that come in that have been really detailed, but we love the interest and the enthusiasm. So it might take us a day or two to gather the data, but it doesn't mean we're not interested in answering those questions and most importantly, alleviating those concerns. So as we wrap up, I'm going to turn it back to our panelists. I don't know, I mean, that last answer was really helpful in terms of looking forward, but is there anything else that you'd like to close with? And I'll allow each of you an opportunity to respond, especially if you feel like there's something about this response or something you want the community to know that maybe we have not touched on just yet. We've covered a lot though.
I can jump in and kick it off. You know, I want to thank Lainey and Chris and Lisa for being here tonight. Over 100 of the community showed up, of the broader community showed up. So thank them for attending. I think it's important that the community be patient while we go through these processes to figure out what actually is going on. I hope we tap into the community for the knowledge that's out there and the history that's there. But I also think it's important not to jump to conclusions until we have actually data that we can count on. And I think that's important to really have information and good data. And I look forward to working with the community and staff to help us get through these tough times. So thank you again for having me here tonight and giving me a chance to speak.
I'm really glad you could join us, Supervisor Rodoni. Chris or Lisa?
Sure, I can just add that, you know, again, please do reach out. Please do contact us, utilize the resources that are available. And please, you know, beyond just the questions, if you have thoughts, suggestions, if you want to point us to additional information, or if you want to offer yourself up as someone with information, please do make yourself available. You know, we are just discovering this as the current staff. And so, you know, there's a lot of help we can use from all of you. And so we'd love to hear from you. And again, everything from how we better communicate the beach closure to your ideas about what's happening to just, you know, questions about what you should or shouldn't do. We're happy to mull those over, answer your specific questions, post the information to the Q&A so that everyone has access to that. And the other thing that I'll just add is that, you know, we do plan on having these regular community town halls. There's other avenues, if there's other information, if it's more helpful to do this in person, please provide that feedback. This makes it easy for lots of people, but if there's something specific that is helpful, just please let us know. We're definitely wanting to hear from all of you.
And I'll just add, I just have a depth of gratitude for the community. This is going to be a learning curve for us in public health, and just like climate changes. And I again really appreciate the knowledge in the community, and we all have a commitment to connecting with that knowledge, and also just a focus on equity and our most vulnerable populations. We know there's also an aging community in Bolinas, and we know there's some members of the community who only speak Spanish. So we have a full commitment to making sure we're available to all members of the community and to hear their needs. And again, this is going to be a complex and dynamic and evolving situation. And we are committed to being alongside of you. And I just also have gratitude to the county executive, our fire, who's supporting us through the Emergency Operations Center and providing structure to this response. We really are aiming to have a measured response because it is something that has been going on for decades, and want to be appropriately reactive, but also make sure we're planning for a successful response that, again, engages the community. So just thankful for being with us tonight, and we'll be on the journey together.
Thank you for that. I want to thank the three of you again for making time, and well, we're down to 74, but we had more than 100 of you online to join us this evening. More than 80 questions were submitted in real time, and I may have inadvertently missed one or two, but as noted, you know, I'm copying and pasting them into a document just to make sure I didn't miss any and we can get them online. So thanks again. I'm going to put into the chat for everyone. I believe I can do this to everybody. Again, the link to that informational webpage, certainly go check it out if you haven't already, and share that with anybody that might have questions. If you see misinformation on Nextdoor or something like that, point people to the website. Just let them see this source of information and let them figure it out versus trying to get it into debate. That's one way that you can certainly help us with that. As Chris indicated, we do plan to have another virtual town hall in about 2 weeks. We're still fine tuning the date and time, but that will also be posted on this informational webpage I just shared with you, as well as posted on Nextdoor. I think Supervisor Rodoni may share it out as well. So we'll make sure that everyone knows about it so that we can gather it again and hopefully have more information to share with you on this. So with that, I hope you all have a wonderful evening. This will be posted online sometime tomorrow, hopefully, if the digital gods are with me. And so you could share that as well. And we hope to see you again very soon. But thank you again for your engagement and interest in this topic this evening. We hope you have a good night.